Our semester. It's really hard to believe that midterms are going to be here before we know it. You don't have a midterm for this class, so don't worry about that. But we're almost there in just a couple of weeks. So it's really going by very fast. But in any case, let's get into what we're going to be doing for next week. So course information, as always, is where you should start your week. I've already got our course calendar open so we can take a look at what we've been learning and where we're going to next. So in week 5, you completed assignments 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, and that was all about words, morphemes, and different kinds of morphemes, at least the first part of different kinds of morphemes. So you learned about free morphemes, which are words that can exist on their own. They have their own intrinsic meaning. They don't have to be attached to anything else to have meaning. Whereas bound morphemes, they can't exist on their own. They have to be attached to something else to have their meaning. And one group of bound morphemes you learned about this past week was inflectional morphemes. You could also call them grammatical morphemes. It's probably a good way to think of them. And they basically just give grammatical meaning to words. So you can add an ed ending to a verb and turn it into a past tense, or an ing ending and make it continuous in the present. You can even take a noun and add an ing to it and turn it into, or I should say a verb, you can add an ing to it and turn it into a noun. So a verb like run, if you add ing to it, you now have the noun running, like running is my favorite activity. So these grammatical morphemes or inflectional morphemes give us all sorts of helpful grammatical information that also helps us understand where those words should go in a sentence. So if you know in English that we have a subject, verb, object, word order, you would expect that a word that has an ed ending most of the time is probably going to be found in the verb position after the subject. So, he talked every day. That would tell you that that's a verb. Even if it were attached to a nonsense word, you'd still know it's probably a verb. Okay, you also worked on your research project proposal, and I'm excited to take a look at all those and see what great topics you've come up with. And you'll get feedback on that, of course, and that will help you, refine and think about even new directions to take with your topics. This week, we're going to do the second half of morphology by looking at assignments 3.4 through 3.6. So let's go ahead over to our course modules area and into Module 3, and we'll scroll on down to Assignment 3.4. Okay, so you're going to be learning about another type of bound morpheme this week, which is called a derivational morpheme. And, I can even kind of walk you through what a derivational morpheme is just by looking at the words derivational and derive that is in this little paragraph that I've given to you here to introduce this topic. So derive is a verb, right? If I add the A-T-I-O-N ending to it, I turn it into a noun. It becomes a derivation. If I add A-L to derivation, I now take that noun and I turn it into an adjective. So I now have the adjective derivational that describes the kind of morphology you're learning about in this activity. So derivational morphemes are basically just morphemes that change kind of the class or category of a word. So if you have a word like happy, which is an adjective, and you add an N-E-S-S to the end, you get the noun happiness. You could have, let's say, a word like, I'm trying to think of another good example, like redo, for example. The verb do by itself, of course, is a verb. If you add the prefix re to it, it changes the meaning, so you're doing it again, but it doesn't change the class or category. So derivational morphemes can change the class or category, or they can change the meaning in some way. But they don't give grammatical information necessarily, like a past tense or a continuous or a plural or something like that. So it's a little bit different. I've given you a couple of examples, sort of funny examples from real life of derivational morphemes. Like I saw this one time, an ad that popped up on a web page I was looking at from Chegg, which is a tutoring service, and it said everything is figure-outable. First of all, figure out is not usually written as a single verb like that. It's usually a phrasal verb like figure and then out is a separate word, and it just means you're trying to discover an answer to something. Maybe it's a little tricky or difficult. But the creators of this ad decided to make it a single verb and then add the ending able to it to turn it into an adjective. So everything is the noun, is the verb, of course, and then figure-outable is the adjective that goes back and describes that subject. So it's kind of a clever way to change words in order to adapt them to different environments, like an advertisement. I thought it was kind of clever. The other one is a sign that I saw in a Colombian restaurant a few years ago. And you can see by the different parts that I've circled there that there are different morphemes at work, different derivational morphemes being used in Spanish words too. So every language has morphology. Every language is going to have different endings to words that will show what the word is for or how it's used in a sentence. So chirroc is just like sheetrock. It's kind of like an English word that's been adopted into Spanish, but the spelling and pronunciation are changed. We do this in English all the time too when we borrow words. So ero in Spanish is going to mean somebody who does that thing. So a chirroquero is a person who lays sheetrock in a house or puts up sheetrock on the walls. The S ending is going to be, so the ERO in this ending would be the derivational morpheme. It takes a noun, chirroc, and turns it into the person who does that, person who installs that in a building. The S ending is just like the inflectional morpheme that we would use in English to show a plural. So ero is a derivational morpheme. The S ending would be an inflectional morpheme. Okay, ayudante, ayudar in Spanish means to help. So an ante in this case means also a person who does that thing. So it would be like a helper and another S ending showing plural. So this would be helpers. So ayudantes para cortar chirroc. So people who cut the sheetrock. And then finally finishero. So finish is borrowed from English and in construction work. And that's basically what this sign is doing, is advertising people to work in a construction project. So finish plus that derivational morpheme that shows it's a person who does that, plus the plural S ending, it's a finisher. So this person is looking for people who can lay sheetrock, people who can help to cut the sheetrock, and finishers, people who do the finishing touches on that construction project. And at the end, it says that it's very well paid. So that's always important, right? So I found both of these examples really interesting because they really demonstrate how derivational morphology works in two languages, English and in Spanish. So now that you've seen those examples and after you've read section 6.4 in chapter 6 of Essentials of Linguistics, and be sure to watch the video presentation in the chapter, you'll see how well you can do recognizing the difference between inflectional and derivational morphemes. And once you click on this link right here, it'll take you to a quiz where you can try this out. And like any other quizzes, you can take this one as many times as you want until you get the score you're satisfied with. Okay, and it's maybe helpful as you're going through this just to take a look at this morpheme summary underneath in 3.4a. And this is not an assignment that you have to complete. It's just a resource for you to look at as you work on this. So with morphemes, we have free and bound morphemes. We have derivational versus inflectional, and these fall into the category of bound morphemes. And we have prefixes versus suffixes. So free morphemes, they can stand alone as their own word. Bound morphemes, you have derivational and inflectional. Inflectional are only going to be suffixes. They'll never be prefixes, and they give grammatical information. And derivational can be prefixes or suffixes, and they change the class, category, or meaning of a word. Okay, and you can take a look at that summary there if you need some reminding about how it works. All right, looking at assignment 3.5, this one is kind of a fun application of morphology, and you get to choose one of these activities. You do not need to do both. So for the first option, like in Chapter 6 of Essentials of Linguistics, you've learned about free and bound morphemes, inflectional derivational morphemes. So using that knowledge that you've gotten from all this study of morphemes, I would like you to take a look at these words that you see here: disgruntled, overwhelmed, unkempt, inevitable, and grandfather. And I want you to think about how many morphemes each of these words has. Hey, because you see that there are different pieces to the words. So, for example, disgruntled. I see DIS, a prefix, which seems like, okay, that could be a derivational morpheme. I see ED here. Okay, that's like a past tense ending. It could even, sometimes ED can also function as an adjective kind of ending, because this word disgruntled would describe a person. Gruntle, okay, is that actually a word by itself or not? Like, it's a little hard to tell because we don't really hear anyone ever use that word anymore. So, this is really kind of a critical thinking activity for you. So you can check the history and origins of each of these words in a dictionary like the Merriam-Webster, or you can take a look at this kind of cool online tool called the Online Etymology Dictionary. It's a dictionary of word origins, or kind of the history of words, and it'll give you some idea of how current some of these words might be. Like, is gruntle a word? Is whelm a word by itself? Is kempt a word by itself? Is evet a word, or does it come from somewhere else? A grandfather seems to be a compound word. Would you classify it that way? So you're kind of giving your opinion. How many morphemes does each of these words have? And what is the root of that word? So you'll post your thoughts to this 3.5 morphology choice activity discussion forum. And there are no exact right or wrong answers to this. People will have different opinions. Our opinions might even be different, and being right or wrong is not really the goal here. The goal is just think about words a little bit more critically, and thinking about the historical origins of words and how morphology plays into that too. The second option is to watch the TED Talk, Go Ahead, Make Up New Words by Erin Keene. And this is a TED Talk given by a lexicographer. So she's basically a person who helps to create dictionaries. And in her TED Talk, she encourages us with, enthusiasm to just go make up new words. That's what language is all about. And we should always be trying to make up new words and be more creative with our language. So I've got a few questions here that I would like you to answer based on watching the TED Talk. So how does she define language at the beginning of her talk? What kinds of grammar does she describe? How does she feel about creativity and word formation? You can let us know if you agree or disagree with her. And she mentions lots of ways that we can make up new words in English, and explain 3 of those. Once you've completed your choice, 1 or 2, then your other task is to reply to one classmate who responded to the question you didn't choose. So in a response of 50 to 100 words, you're going to tell your classmates something new you learned from their post. So the idea here is that you get to choose something because, choosing is always good. It's good to have choices. And at the same time, you're going to get at least a flavor of what your classmate chose. And for some reason, if you have, let's say, a lot of people choose the same one as you, let's say 3 people chose number 1 and the rest of the class chose number 2, that could happen. Just choose, whatever is left over for you at the point that you're doing the assignment. So you don't absolutely have to choose the one the one that you didn't do. Look for that first. So if you do not see that option, then just go ahead and reply to somebody and comment on what they said. But the goal is to choose one that's different from you. Okay, and finally in 3.6, you'll be learning about the difference between content and function words. And this is going to help us kind of bridge from morphology to syntax. Syntax is the next subfield we're coming to in Module 4. And syntax is going to be kind of moving up to the next level In phonetics, we started with sounds. In morphology, we moved on to words and pieces of words. And now we're going to take those words and figure out how they fit in sentences. So this is going to get us ready for that next module. So what you'll do here is watch a screencast that I've already prepared for you that explains a little bit of the difference between content and function words. I'll also include a link to the website that I used, like the web page that I used to help give some explanation and background on that. And then you'll apply those concepts in the attached exercise right here. So, as it tells you in part 1, you'll highlight the content words, or let's actually just take a look at it. We'll just open it up directly and see the instructions right there. Okay. All right, so the first part right here says which are content words and which are function words. So as it tells you over here, in the 2 sentences in part 1, highlight the content words in yellow and the function words in green. After you've seen the video that I have attached here, you'll know the difference. You should know the difference. So those first 2 sentences are just for you to identify the difference. Which are content words, which are function words. Be able to recognize them in normal sentences, even though those sentences are a little bit crazy. Okay, so going back to our document, you're just going to highlight content words in one color and function words in another color. So think about the parts of speech, think about the structure of these sentences as you make your decisions. All right, the other part 2, answer the question about how morphology helps you distinguish content and function words in nonsense sentences. Okay, so in this second sentence, it asks you, how are you able to distinguish content from function words? How do inflectional and derivational morphology help? So you see some words there that are clearly function words. How do you know they're function words, and why do they look so familiar? You also see a lot of words that are content words. I think the underlining in red is probably going to be a very big clue about which words are content words. And how would you know they're content words? If Microsoft Word didn't identify them as strange words, nonsense words that aren't spelled in a way that the program can recognize, if you didn't have that clue there, how would you know that these are content words? How do the endings on the words help you see that these are content words? Okay, so those are the 2 things I want you to do with that activity. Just identify content and function words in sentences that have totally recognizable words, and then explain how you're able to do that with a nonsense sentence that has lots of words that don't even exist. Okay, so that is everything for the second half of Module 3. Like always, reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, comments about anything. Office hours are like usual, Monday and Wednesday from 2:15 to 4:15, or Friday from 1 to 3. So I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you all next week.